Okay, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Centre for Digital Inquiry, based at the University of Warwick. This morning, we are talking apps, coronavirus apps specifically. We'll get started almost right away, but I just wanted to give one or two points about the Q&A. So we've enabled chat and also questions and also voting. So put your question in the appropriate box while we're talking, and we'll get to them at the end. We should have around 20 minutes for discussion. But note, because of this, your questions may be visible. So avoid putting in any kind of sensitive data if you don't want it to show up in the recording that is happening right now as well. So, hello. Anna, can you start the slideshow, please? Hello. We are all part of a research network called the App Studies Initiative, which connects the Digital Methods Initiative based in Amsterdam, the Collaborative Research Centre Media of Cooperation based in Siegen, the Centre for Interdisciplinary Methodologies at Warwick, and also some other research centres. Today, we'd like to present our collaborative research on COVID-19 pandemic response apps as they appear in and are mediated through app stores. And we'll do this from a digital method style perspective. The research is part of an ongoing project called COVID-19 App Store and Data Flow Ecologies, which is funded by the Economic and Social Research Council in the UK. Mobile apps have emerged as a key element in the response to the COVID-19 pandemic in countries all around the globe. This is a unique development, the first appified global crisis, if you will. As marketplaces and distribution platforms for these apps, the leading app stores inevitably play a central role in the global response to COVID-19. In this project, we map the emerging COVID-19 app ecosystem as listed in the Google Play and Apple's App Store. Here you see an aggregated visualization of the 247 curated COVID-19 app icons from Google Play. What we mean by curated will become clearer as we go on. A number of ethico-political concerns have shaped the public discussion of COVID-19 apps, such as those to do with surveillance, corporate influence, or app effectiveness, and often with a focus on contact tracing apps. In terms of academic research, existing studies are mainly medically focused in the area of mHealth, focusing on evaluating apps in relation to public health frameworks, for example, or coming from computer science and focusing on security and cryptography. There is currently no research that focuses substantially on the app stores and is informed by critical data studies and platform studies. We call our approach multi-situated app studies. It involves close attention to the multivalent affordances of apps as software packages, particularly their capacity to enter into diverse groupings and relations depending on different infrastructural situations. The changing situations they evoke and participate in accordingly make apps visible and accountable in a variety of unique ways. Our approach brings to mind the well-known multi-sited ethnographic studies which follow the actors, but rather than following the actors themselves, such as in an A&T style analysis, instead we foreground the situative enactment of social and infrastructural relations as guided by and through apps. That is, the apps are involved in different situations, and each can be considered a distinct site of or for app research. We therefore see apps as having different entry points where how apps appear which relations they enter, and what can be known about them varies. Our focus today, app stores, are one such entry point. They situate or demarcate apps in specific ways and make available certain ways of knowing apps. Our overarching research question is, what does the COVID-19 app space look like, and how is this space mediated or shaped by app stores? More specifically, we ask, how do Google Play and Apple's App Store organize this space? This leads us to a number of sub-questions that will organize the research presented today. Who are the actors developing COVID-19 apps? For example, governments, private companies, academic institutions, or partnerships? Second question, what kind of app responses are they developing? For example, contact tracing, quarantine compliance, symptom checking, and so on. Third question, how responsive are app developers in updating their apps? For example, what is the timeline and pacing of app updates? And four, which terms do developers use in their app descriptions? What can key term analysis of app descriptions tell us about the framing of these apps, for example? So, actors, responses or feature combinations, responsiveness, and terms. We all know app stores differ, but to control the COVID-19 app space, app stores have introduced additional rules and guidelines for developers using COVID-19 and related terms in app titles and descriptions. So both stores have unique COVID-19 strategies. But once we started exploring the stores empirically through queries, we noticed more pronounced differences with how these two stores handled the COVID-19 app space. And now I hand over to Esther for the next section of the presentation.
Thanks, Nate. So our starting point was to query COVID-19 in the two dominant app stores, Google Play and Apple App Store. The two stores, as Nate mentioned, organize the COVID-19 app space radically differently, which I will briefly talk about in the following slides. For Google Play, we immediately noticed that we were rerouted to a relatively small selected set of apps by Google in each country store. That is, Google is redirecting search queries to a set of approved apps per country that you can see on the right, 4 apps in the US store, also 4 in the Dutch store and 8 in the German store. A specific crisis response from the Play Store then is to limit the results to official sources. Our first finding is that most countries offer a relatively small selection of country-specific apps in response to the pandemic. In addition to these country-specific apps, we find globally shared World Health Organization apps, which are returned in almost all country versions of Google Play, notably except the US, where the WHO apps are not returned, showing how geopolitical concerns make it into the App Store. On the left side of the slide, you can see how we formulated and tested a number of misspellings to COVID-19, such as COVID with double I, in order to explore whether or not we could locate a non-editorial, non-official space in Google Play. As you can see, this misspelling indeed returns more corona-related apps. Apple, on the other hand, did not redirect our corona and COVID-19 queries. Instead, Apple's App Store returns ranked lists of hundreds of apps. These ranked lists of apps are less country-specific than Google's results. As you can see on the right, the query COVID-19 in the Dutch App Store also returns France's Stop COVID app. Next, we scraped both stores for COVID-19 in all available country stores using the DMI App Store scrapers. For Google Play, this led to, first of all, an editorial collection that we analyzed as the official app response per country, with 247 unique apps. And secondly, a non-editorial list of 163 apps that we retrieved by trying various misspellings for the COVID-19 coronavirus. For Apple, this led to ranked lists per country with 248 unique apps. In this visualization, you can see the overlaps and differences between the data sets. So each dot represents an app, and they appear in one or more collections, which is represented by the circles. So the Play Store is the green circle, App Store is blue. Google is further divided into editorial and non-editorial apps. The dot color depicts the actor type. So governmental apps are most prevalent in the entire set, but especially in the official Google Play Store. The unique App Store results are instead predominantly offered by private actors. There's also a significant number of governmental apps for Android that don't have an equivalent in Apple's App Store, which may reflect the differing market shares of respective operating systems in different countries. 96% market dominance for Google Play Store in India, for example. An initial conclusion we can draw from this visualization that it makes a significant difference which operating system you have, because you will be presented with different apps in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. And now I'll hand over to Fernando, who will talk about the analysis.
Thank you, Esther. So as mentioned, we have been categorizing the types of actors that are behind those apps, that develop those apps. We identified the developers by looking at the developer name, which is typically an organization name, the developer identifier, app descriptions, and developer websites. We categorize those apps based, such as the apps that can belong to more than one category. So they are not mutually exclusive, but each app can be in multiple categories at once. And what we found, first of all, is that the COVID-19 apps have a distinct composition of actors in this space. Notably, there are governmental actors, which is the largest group, followed by private actors, and then health authority actors. And secondly, as mentioned, there are some notable relative differences across these stores. Most prominently in the Google Play App Store, we find governmental actors to be more prevalent compared to the App Store, whereas in the App Store, we find more private actors that develop those pandemic response apps. And interestingly, we found that a portion of these apps were jointly developed through partnerships, which were explicitly mentioned in the descriptions of those apps. And we visualized those partnerships as well in these network diagrams that you can see now. Each node here is scaled according to the number of occurrences of the category, and links represent those partnerships that we looked for. Most prominently, the particular conditions for the COVID-19 app response gave rise to this governmental actors seeking app development collaborations with private actors for both the Android and the iOS apps. This may suggest that governments are seeking app development expertise in the private and commercial sector. And academics don't seem to have particular private partnerships, but they work with all actors, such as government actors, private actors, health authorities, and civil society. We also inquired into the kinds of apps that these actors build to understand the types of responses that they offer. To identify the response type, we looked also at the app description, the developer website, the app icons, which Nate has shown in the beginning, and also the interface screenshots that are available in these app stores. Once again, apps can belong to multiple categories at once. And in addition to contact tracing apps, which received the most attention in the news, we also find a multitude of other response types in addition to those news reporting apps. We find that for both stores, over 50% of the apps offer news and information on the pandemic. Over 40% offer different kinds of symptom checkers or symptom reporting tools. And around 20% engage with contact tracing in particular. And about 15% offer tools for remote healthcare, including e-health, as Nate also mentioned. And we also find new categories compared to the existing literature, such as mental health apps for kids, for veterans, and first responders to help deal with the pandemic crisis, or apps soliciting data for research studies, such as the German Corona Datenspende app, where you can donate data from various devices, including your mobile phone, as well as your Fitbit, to assist in academic studies on COVID-19. And when comparing the two stores, we find that networked medicine apps are more prevalent in the App Store, while crisis communication, quarantine compliance, and informant apps, which help to snitch people breaking COVID-19 rules, are mostly or only available in Google Play. And notably, these quarantine compliance, informant, movement permits, as well as crisis communication apps are primarily built by governmental actors. We find apps that facilitate forms of crowdsourced state surveillance in Argentina, in Chile, and in Russia. And these apps for social monitoring enable users to report on suspicious behavior by others. In Bangladesh and India, we found apps developed by the government that call on citizens to report possibly affected people or to perform your citizen responsibility. Here, reporting is seen as a duty of the citizen. In Lithuania and India, we also find the gamification of the pandemic with apps for collecting points for daily health monitoring and symptom tracking to receive rewards or discounts. And contact tracing and exposure notification apps are, as expected, typically built by government actors or in collaboration, so collaboration between government and private actors. Private actors engage in building information and news apps, as well as in remote healthcare and symptom checking apps. And finally, the academic actors mostly engage in the development of information news apps, symptom checking apps, research studies, and mental health apps. And now over to Anne for the final part of the analysis.
So next we looked at the responsivity of countries. How responsive are app developers to the evolving pandemic? So we consider responsivity as a proxy for how seriously different countries engage with apps in their response to the coronavirus pandemic, calculated as the number of app versions released per time interval. So we plotted here the Android apps per country on a timeline, showing when they were first introduced in transparent circles and when they were updated in colored squares. And we can see that in March, April 2020, the early app development commences, with most countries launching their apps. And interestingly, a number of apps were developed before the crisis started. These are mostly existing medical apps for communicating with health professionals or apps providing health information that have now been repurposed for the corona crisis. India, which has 61 apps in total, signaling a more regional app response, shows a high responsivity in terms of app updates, as well as Brazil and the United Arab Emirates. And some countries, such as the UK, Albania, Bulgaria, Denmark, and Ecuador, show limited responsivity. And these may also indicate, so this lack of responsivity may also indicate national problems and delays in the development of COVID-19 apps, including due to controversies. So in June, Denmark's Data Protection Agency prohibited the app because it was processing personal data in an inappropriate way. So this app was then terminated until further notice, and it has been since relaunched after it addressed the issues. And the UK initially launched an app using a centralized approach, which was quickly abandoned. And the new UK app now makes use of the Google Apple Exposure Notification API. So in short, a lack of responsivity may also reflect controversy within countries around the app development related to concerns over data protection, centralized or decentralized approaches, and so on. And this timeline shows when Android apps in green and iOS apps in blue were first introduced and how often they were updated, split up by actor type. And overall, the graph shows that governmental and private apps have a high responsivity. They are regularly updated and continuously being released from April onward. Another remarkable observation is that the apps in 4 categories have been repurposed in the rapid response to the pandemic in the government, private health, and civil society categories. Furthermore, of the repurposed government apps, most are Google Play apps, while repurposed private apps are mostly Apple's App Store apps. And next we analyze the app descriptions, which tells us something about the app's frame or how they position or promote themselves to their users. So we focused on the discourse present in the app's descriptions and present a quantification of the key terms. And these terms were derived in a bottom-up manner, where we collected terms based on our collective reading of the app descriptions. So we examined 2 prominent discourses in the app descriptions. The first is related to the techniques used, and the second is related to data and privacy solutions or concerns. So the techniques listed here give a sense of how app developers understand and implement how to deliver COVID-19 app responses and how this is conveyed to users. So we find prominent terms related to location, notification, tracking and tracing, as well as implementation terms related to GPS, Bluetooth, smart or platform, as well as mentions of specific machine learning algorithms for identifying COVID-19 symptoms. And we also find specific implementation terms related to video, chat, messaging, and bots, often used in remote healthcare and diagnosis. So overall, the distribution of these terms is similar in both stores, suggesting a similar discourse in both stores. The second analysis identified the terms related to data and privacy. So we observe a relatively high use of terms describing how data will be collected, how it will be dealt with, including terms such as anonymous, encrypted, locally stored. And we also find claims that data will be deleted or transmitted via HTTPS in a secure manner. Overall, reviewing this discourse, we can observe that the app response to the pandemic is to a certain extent a data privacy sensitive one. Half of the iOS app descriptions mention data privacy terms, while 40% of the Android apps do the same. So this discourse is rather significant. And now Michael will present our conclusions.
Hello. By way of conclusion, I'm going to present an overview of the findings that we've been describing in the presentation. So first, in relation to our research question around which actors are involved, in addition to apps from official or recognized government entities, we found that there are many private apps and or private public sector collaborations in the space. While this doesn't necessarily conflict with the official App Store policies, it does expand empirically on our understanding of how these policies are enacted in practice. In relation to responses, we see a diverse range of responses to the pandemic through apps that goes beyond the focus of digital contact tracing and symptom reporting. So there's categories, for instance, like informant or quarantine enforcement that have been relatively marginal in critical accounts of COVID-19 apps, but that we've captured in our initial analysis of the app stores. In terms of responsivity, there are many Android apps versions that we see developed in a short period of time. And we've also see that there's quite some app repurposing that plays a role in response to the crisis. In the Apple Store, we see that there are more private apps that have been repurposed, while government apps are more prominently repurposed in the Google Play Store. And finally, in terms of discourse, with the app descriptions, we do see that there's a data privacy discourse present in the app descriptions. And we also have picked up on some indication of how the interventions in the pandemic have been implemented through different technologies and techniques. Just to now offer some sort of takeaways from the research we've done so far. One thing that we would stress is the importance of the role of app stores, something that hasn't necessarily been foregrounded in the research that so far has been conducted on COVID-19 apps. So for us, focusing on the app stores shows that there are different approaches to governance taken up by Apple and Google, where Google, for instance, reroutes the queries for COVID-19 while Apple returns ranked lists with little country specificity. The App Store for us as well is important to focus on because it can be used as a demarcation device. So in our research, we're able to use the App Store to retrieve a data set of official responses per country. So Google Play provides us with a sort of national local response, whereas the Apple Store provides us with a more international response. And in addition to this, it also allows us to see some geopolitical differentiation in the app responses. So we see through the App Store regional, infrastructural, and institutional variation across countries. In addition, as a concluding point that we're still sort of contemplating and developing in the research, we see shifting relations in platform governance as well through the App Store. So what we would sort of tentatively suggest is that within the context of the pandemic, platform governance is redrawn under exceptional circumstances. And this is something that we're continuing to investigate. Finally, to give you an indication of our next steps. The analysis that we've presented today really is like the sort of first part of the project that concentrates on app stores. And for us, we want to further develop the analysis of the existing data in a number of ways, one of which is that we're continuing to collect this data at scheduled intervals to allow us for a longitudinal analysis of this space. So how much it changes, the app stores change over time. And these data sets were also in partnership with the Internet Archive, and we'll be archiving the data there with them. There's also, maybe it's a point for Q&A. If any of you have questions about our analysis, we also have a few, additional questions and points of focus with this data that we're developing, but I'll leave that for discussion. The next major step in the research is we'll be focusing on this week with the workshop organized at CDI Warwick. So over the next few days, we're going to zero in on a smaller group of apps. For instance, we're interested in looking at the exposure notification apps. These are the apps that are using the Apple Google protocol for digital contact tracing. We're also interested in focusing on these editorialized apps. So the ones that are delivered to users when they query COVID-19 in the store. So we want to look at those subsets for specific countries like the UK and the Netherlands and Germany. And for these smaller group of apps, we'll be performing walkthroughs. So we'll move through the app step by step and document the onboarding process in the apps. We're also interested in collecting the network connections and data flow information of these apps. So during active use, what data flows are enacted by the apps. And then finally, we'll look at a more kind of static analysis of the code of the apps, specifically for the Android apps, the APKs, and we'll be looking at what software development kits are being used, and also the presence of trackers and the types of permissions that the app requests. And that's it. So thanks a lot for listening. And I'll leave you with the final slide with some additional further readings.
Great. Thanks, Michael. If there are questions, now's the time. You can put them in the Q&A. If you're comfortable asking them, if not in person, in voice, I'm happy to make people participants, and you can pose your question. Okay, so we have one question from Wenhao. Wenhao, do you want to speak your question? I'll make you a participant. Here we go.
So I think the first question was in regard to the gamification of the app space in terms of what kind of rewards and credits are actually being delivered. So this was, we found a couple of examples of the apps, but we haven't seen from the screenshots in the App Store the actual rewards that would be engaged. So this is where such a thing as the walkthrough that we're conducting next would contribute this, additional information about what aspects of the crisis are being gamified here. Is it indeed what we found so far? It's about symptom reporting. So it's a kind of like nudging feature to have citizens continuously report on their symptoms as to, have consistency in the reporting data. But we couldn't see from the interface what the actual rewards were for this part that was being gamified. So hopefully a thing such as a walkthrough method could then contribute to finding out what exactly do you get a discount on your health, your health insurance or on your groceries, or what are these kind of discounts and rewards?
There's also been some apps that, because the thing is, I guess, for digital contact tracing, you need to reach these thresholds in a population of active users. 60% of a population is one threshold that's often cited. So with a case where use of the app is voluntary, then these kinds of incentives are utilized to build up a user base. In some cases as well, there's been the incentive of things like a larger data plan offered to users if they download a contact tracing app or symptom reporting app in collaboration with a telecom in a country. I forget the exact, there's at least one or two of those ones. I don't know, I don't have that on hand, but if you're interested, I can look in the data for those cases if you like. Just send me an email.
Yeah, and
Okay.
there was a second question as well, also about kind of the differences between how Apple and Google sort the apps in the same region differently. And that is kind of a very radically differently, actually, because also kind of the selection of the apps that are returned in Google Play Store, that's really kind of a small selection. So in the Netherlands, it's 4 or 5 apps. In the Apple App Store, it's like hundreds of apps that also include a lot of apps local apps from other countries, like we saw on the slide. Like the 4th or 5th result is an app from France in Apple App Store. So in that sense, kind of how these app stores sort and also offer, basically also kind of the selection that they offer is radically different in that sense.
Okay. Wenhao, did you want to follow up, or are you happy with that response? I'll give you a moment to reply. We have another question from Alex, who said he's happy to talk in using voice. So, Alex, take it away.
Hello, I'm a voice now. Thanks, guys. It was really interesting. I have a very specific question from the Israeli context, which I'm a bit more familiar with. So you were talking about like different versions and the way that different versions change, and I wonder. So in Israel case, for example, there were two official distinct versions of the Corona tracing app, and each was like branded differently and had a different kind of goals a bit, and the second version was especially like touted as like, we learned lessons from the first one, and we're not going to do the same mistakes. So my question is very broad, because I'm not sure what is possible with your ways, but can you somehow trace through your methods or have traced those changes in kind of rhetorical responses to the like to the approaches, but on per country basis? Do you think it's possible like to do some sort of like digital methods zoom into qualitative work into those issues? Thanks.
Yeah, this is a good question. Does somebody want to take it? I mean, one of the things that we haven't done is take different shots or like different periods of the app descriptions. But it strikes me that one way to do so would be to kind of map the app developer updates to app description change over time, and also to see if you can pick up changes in the rhetoric based on walkthroughs. But we haven't done that. Does anybody else want to say something?
Yeah, I can say something, because I think, well, thanks also for pointing us to this case example, because I think this is also something that we're actually looking for these kind of interesting case examples in the next step of the analysis, where we will look more qualitatively into specific apps. So you can think about comparing apps across countries in the same category, like exposure notification apps, but also perhaps in the same country. Yeah, especially if they're branded differently, that will be something that is probably also something that would come to light through interface analysis, I guess, the walkthrough. Anna, did you also want to respond? I saw you unmuting, right?
No, so this is also partly why we created a scheduler to retrieve the results for the queries every single week. So we have a data set that runs from June to up till now, and we're going to continue collecting this data, also enabling us to analyze these changing discourses of the apps. So this is indeed also interesting, both in terms of indeed more like privacy related terms, as well as indeed if we see kind of like evolving space of what kind of technical solutions are being offered. Are we all going for, the Google App one? Because initially in our data set, we saw a lot of different approaches to contact tracing, right? So people were we saw this kind of like experimentation with the technical ways the ways in which one could do contact tracing. And the question is how that space evolves over time, whether we're moving to, a number of small set of solutions. So also we observed that initially people were using the European 3DTP protocol, or a more privacy sensitive protocol for the decentralized storage of data. And now we don't see that in the app descriptions at all anymore. So it's also kind of like that initiative kind of like fell apart over time. So we can also see that in the app space. So yeah, these are also hopefully kind of things we can attend to with the data that we've collected over time.
Okay, thanks for the question, Alex. We have another question from VVT, and the question is, how does the App Store / Google Play Store handle misinformation or misleading information regarding Corona? And is there any regulation?
Are you going to answer this live, Anna? Because I saw you hit the button.
I was going to the slide that partly addresses the question, but maybe you would like to elaborate.
Yeah, so indeed, kind of that is also in this case, we can see a kind of a radically different approach by the two stores. And Anna indeed put up the slides where we highlighted some of the policy indeed kind of regarding which apps are allowed in, or kind of are allowed by the app space in this in their stores. And especially when you compare the two stores, Google seems to be much more strict. And also indeed kind of, so it's in response to the pandemic, but at the same time, it also seems that platforms are also dealing with responses to the infodemic. And Google's response in this particular case is to be, and it's, you know, if you know some of how Google deals with information in other of their spaces, like the search engine, it's very unlike Google to be so radically editorial, and which seems to be their specific response in this case. But this is also something that we want to look further into. But yeah, that would be our reply, I think, for this moment. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that.
Yeah, I just want to add, it's not so much about the stores themselves, but there's also a discourse of misinformation in the apps, particularly news and information apps. So a number of the news and information apps we saw explicitly say, in order to combat misinformation, or in order to ensure that you're getting the best, most accurate information, we provide this app, and it's a curated news feed. All right. Well, I guess we can call this. Amazingly, we are 15 minutes under time, which is certainly a first for me. So I would just like to thank you all for attending this morning. Do sign up to the Center for Digital Inquiry's Twitter feed if you haven't done so, where we will be announcing future events. So thanks for coming.